when it's brought up, especially in the Russian context. And therefore, they've decided internally that only 2 persons in the organization are allowed to officially talk about the situation in Chechnya. And Svetlana, you are not one of those. So, also, I want to say before we move into the topic that we're gonna have a tea talk in our stand at the opposite hall of this room after this seminar. So you were welcome to join us there to have a more informal conversation with Svetlana as well. All right, I think we should start with bringing up the context of this law a little bit, maybe the legal frameworks. Konstantin, maybe you could help us get us to know a little more what this, what does this law actually ban? What does it mean? Propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations. Is it possible to make sense of this somehow?
Yeah, well, it is because on the one hand we can read what is written in the law, and on the other hand there are already court decisions which interpret this law, and actually where the courts decided whether certain acts can or cannot be considered as cases of this propaganda. But the whole idea of this legislation was, well, the way it was explained was the protection of children from the information that is harmful for their well-being and their development. That's how they officially put it. And the law basically bans dissemination of any information which promotes positive or even neutral image of any sexual relations which are not monogamic heterosexual among children, among minors, that's to say, under the Russian legislation, those who are under 18 years old. So any piece of information which says that relations between people of the same sex is, well, as good as or as normal as heterosexual relations would actually fall under this ban.
Okay, thank you, Konstantin. Svetlana, could you sort of also tell us a little bit more how this law has been applied during the last 4 years? Also, maybe we should mention that originally was a law in some, I think it was 13 municipalities and local governments in Russia first adopted this law before it became federal. Yeah, so maybe there's also been cases on those levels. Say something. What's about it?
Well, actually, this law was applied in many, many ways. And probably the most well-known case is the case against Yelena Klimova and the group Children 4 or 4. Yelena Klimova was a journalist in a small city, Nizhny Tagil, somewhere in the central part of Russia. And at some point in the end of 2012 or 2013, she published an article about homosexual minors. And after this article, she started to receive messages, she started to receive letters from minors who were saying, thank you for this article, because I didn't really know what's going on with myself, and all the information in mass media is so aggressive, so thank you so much. And after that, she started a community, online community in the social network Vkontakte, which is kind of a Russian version of the Facebook. And after that, there were numerous cases against them, at least 5. Different cases were initiated by different prosecutor offices in different cities. And basically, many, many times, the Russian authorities, they tried to close this group, this social network, where people, where minors just supporting each other. And it is a really big case in Russia, probably is the most well-known. But there are also other cases. For example, right now it's really hard for mass media to work with the issue of homosexuality. For example, there were cases when some local mass media were fined according to this law. There was a case when one small newspaper in Vladivostok published an article about teacher who was fired because of his homosexuality or alleged homosexuality. And basically the article was quite positive, and afterwards this newspaper was fined. So right now it's really difficult because fines are quite big for local newspapers. So in many cases the journalists, even if they want to publish something, they can be quite afraid.
Yeah, you mentioned that fines are among the punishments involved. What does the law state? What are the types of punishment you can get from this? Is it fines only, or?
Well, basically it's considered to be an administrative offense, so a person cannot be imprisoned for that, but fines can be quite high, especially if there is so-called propaganda with using of mass media or in the internet. And just recently we have seen the first case when a person was taken to the court just for reposting the social network. There is an activist in Samara, and in 2015 she reposted some information, and right now she is taken basically to the court just for repost.
Okay, thank you, Svetlana. I would like to. These are the concrete measures that's been taken. But if we move over to a more general level, the implications for the LGBT community and the individuals as well. Is there a before this propaganda and an after? What has happened? You have these 4 years, and what are the general developments?
Yeah, I will start, and probably Konstantin will say something afterwards. I would say that Russia has never been like very friendly country for LGBT people. But what we can see quite clearly is that after the adoption of this law, the level of hate crimes increased, the amount of hate crimes increased, and the worst thing is that people who are attacking, they actually believe that there is a government behind them. So they feel their power, and actually they are stating quite clearly at the court that they attacked exactly because they believe that this person is homosexual. And I believe that this is the most scary thing. So those people who attack, they really do believe that they do right things, that the government is supporting them. They are saying that, you know, there is this propaganda law, so what we are doing is absolutely right.
Yeah, Konstantin.
Yeah, just picking up from the point made by Svetlana, well, as in the case of a number of other restrictive laws that were adopted in Russia over the last years, the main impact, the main effect of this particular law is not its direct implementation, because, well, the number of cases is not so big until the moment, but the main impact is the public message sent by this legislation and the whole public discussion around it. And the message is that, yeah, the state policies now are homophobic. It's not okay to be homosexual. You should keep it strictly private. You should never show it anywhere in publics. And well, many people of radical views, of right-wing views, would take it as a license to attack those whom they perceive to be homosexual, and they feel that they will go unpunished for that. So that's the main effect that this law produced, and yeah. I would say we clearly see the difference between, well, the number of violent incidents before the adoption of this legislation and after, and the severity of those incidents. So now we see the radical increase in the level of violence against LGBTI persons and those who are perceived as part of LGBTI community.
I just want to add something, that actually this violence, it's not only about LGBT people, because just recently in Moscow, young man was killed, beaten basically to death, just because he has a hat. And those people who beaten him, they believe that he is homosexual. And it was just the only one reason why they attacked him and why he is dead right now. Yeah, the way he was dressed. And basically this law is saying that, like, you know, you can do whatever you want and you will be protected, and it's really allowed in some kind of public conscience.
So on this other side of, we here in Sweden we've also seen reports about also networks of people trapping gay people in Russia, through contact ads and things, and then assaulting them, and horrible stories. And is this an ongoing thing? Are they also unpunished, these networks of people really targeting on gays and transgender people?
Yeah, well, this is not happening so widely anymore, I would say, because, well, the leader of one of those groups was actually persecuted on criminal charges, but those charges were not related to homophobic violence. So they found other grounds to persecute this person and to stop the activities of this group, but officially the reason for that was different. So it was not, they did not send the signal that this is something unacceptable.
Has anyone been prosecuted because of the crimes they've done against transgender or gay or bisexual people? Or is there no such case?
Well, in general, our courts and our law enforcement agencies avoid recognizing homophobic, hate-motivated crimes, like this hate motive in the crimes committed against LGBTI persons. So, as far as I know, there is basically no cases where this hate motive was recognized. So normally it is investigated and prosecuted as an ordinary crime. But maybe Svetlana has some other data.
No, I absolutely agree. Usually police and the investigative commissions, investigative authorities, they don't consider it as a hate crime, just hooliganism or whatever else crime. But I wanted to add something else about communication with the police and with the law enforcement agencies. The thing is, LGBT people in Russia, they're afraid to go to the police for many reasons, because they know that they can be humiliated in the police station. They know that police can refuse to register their case, and basically they know that can be even charged. So there is no protection. For example, if here in Sweden something is happening, probably you know that the police will help you, and that like people who attack or people who do something bad, they're going to be punished. In Russia, unfortunately, it's not the case.
Okay, thank you. Time is moving, so maybe we should move on. And I would like to ask you as well about LGBTQ families. There's also, we've got to know about stories where there've been laws suggested where children of LGBTQ people should be taken in custody by authorities. And so, what's the situation now? And is there anything particular to say about families?
Yeah, well, that's true that, well, the impact of the law actually goes beyond, well, the violent cases and beyond official persecution for their dissemination of some information. And, well, many LGBTIQ families also started feeling unprotected and are now afraid of the risk of their children being taken from them, of being deprived of parental rights, because, well, they also think the law can be interpreted in a way that the very fact that you are LGBTI parents and you are open to your own children can be taken as an instance of this propaganda, that you are actually showing to your own children that this is okay. This is an okay lifestyle. And I know a number of families which decided to leave Russia because they did not feel safe with their children in the country after the law was adopted. And I know that there are some cases when actually this law was referred to when people were deprived of their parental rights, but I believe Svetlana can tell more about that.
Yeah, the network, the organization I work with, we actually worked with one case of transgender person who was deprived from seeing her biological child just because of her transgenderness. And basically it was court that decided that her transgenderness can affect the health and the state of a child. So for many years, this woman is trying to be with her child, at least to see her child at some point, but right now it's absolutely impossible for her, and it is not the only one case like that. We know about such cases, and of course families, especially with children under custody, they are terrified, they not talk about their families publicly for obvious reasons, and of course many of them trying to leave the country, because I believe that it's one of the worst things that can ever happen to a family, to be separated with children.
I would like to also ask you about the perspective, the youth perspective here, because how is this? Do you have contacts with? How are your contacts with youth? Have they sort of? Are they scared to contact you in the organizations? I mean, more than they were earlier on, and yeah, just give us a picture how this has affected youth. You know, about to come out, but.
Well, when this law was designed. The authorities, they told that this law was designed specifically to support minors, to protect minors, but basically it works just the other way. Because minors are the most vulnerable group right now. I remember myself, when I was growing, there was no information about homosexuality and it was a problem, but there was no open aggression towards LGBT people. And now children who are growing and who are feeling something about their homosexuality, what they're hearing from TV is that LGBT people are the threat for the nation, that they're, I don't know, faggots, sick people, people to be cured, or foreign agents. And actually the representatives of the authorities, they can talk about that publicly with no even condemnation from the society. We do work with minors. We provide psychological support also for minors, but of course there are a lot of difficulties. And many psychologists, they actually refuse to work with minors, homosexual minors, because they're afraid that they can be accused of propaganda. Or there are other situations when psychologists are trying to cure homosexual minors.
Time is running very fast, and we have only a couple of minutes, 1.5 minutes left. I wanted to address the targeting of the LGBTQ community in relation to the civil society and the shrinking space in general, but we will not have much time to dig into that. And we had a seminar earlier on that topic. But maybe instead, just moving on to what would you like the world to do? Some advice. How could we support the LGBTQ community and individuals from abroad? Is there anything we can do here in Sweden?
I can see 2 points here. The first one is that, of course, the Russian authorities, they don't want to look monsters. And when there is a lot of international attention, at some point they have to do something. Even so, right now, they're not so reactive. The other thing I wanted to say is that sometimes it looks that Sweden, for example, is a perfect country where everything is so good in terms of LGBT rights and human rights in general. But basically, I believe that all of us have a lot to do ahead. And actually, I would like the societies, the communities in such a developed countries as Sweden to continue the fight, because actually we all have a lot of problems.
Before you answer, Konstantin, I just realized that we have an extra 10 minutes because this is not a regular 20-minute seminar. Usually it is. We have 30 minutes for this, so we're not in such a rush. So, sorry, Svetlana, that was your final words, but I'll ask you to back into the seminar again. And it means we have some time to more linger on the repression against the community and how it sort of interrelates to the general picture. Maybe is the LGBT community and organizations especially targeted, or is this part of a general picture? Konstantin?
Yeah, well, I would say it is part of the general picture, and that, well, LGBTI activism is just one of the topics, one of the types of activism that irritate our authorities the most. Not the only one, but one of those, because they are also, I mean, trying to restrict any other human rights activism, environmental activism, anti-corruption work, and this is just one of out of this list. But of course, this law banning propaganda of homosexual relations provides an additional instrument, an additional ground for restrictions. And this concerns, well, any publications made by LGBTI groups and activists, because they have to, in order not to be persecuted, they have to label every publication that it is 18+, that it's not for minors. Whenever any public cultural event is organized which covers LGBTI topics, well, under this legislation, the organizers are obliged to ensure that no minors are present in the audience. And this is something that our colleagues who organize an LGBTI film festival for many years have to follow. So they have to check now the passports for every spectator before admitting those people, allowing those people to enter the room where the screenings take place. And of course, this is an extra restriction, extra burden for them. But in general, I would say that mostly LGBTI organizations and groups now feel pressure because of other pieces of legislation, including the foreign agents law, because well, they cannot survive with the resources that they can raise within the country. There is a problem of organizing any crowdfunding campaigns for LGBTI issues. There are no private donors inside the country that would openly support LGBTI activism. So the main source of funding for LGBTI groups still is foreign funding from the partners abroad. And this is severely restricted by the foreign agents legislation. So now the groups have to be creative, have to invent other ways of, new ways of operations, because they cannot get this funding officially and directly inside Russia.
Thank you, Konstantin. Svetlana, I would like to ask you, maybe you could just give us some examples from your organization. How is, I mean, when you organize things, public events, things, how do authorities interact with you? What have they, I guess there are numerous examples of how they've been disturbing events, and I think the details are very important to sort of get to know here.
You know, the most important thing about our relations with the authorities is the fact that they're absolutely unpredictable. I would like to talk right now about one city where we have community center and where we have a group of activists. It's Perm. And the same year, the Rainbow Flash Mob, a public event, was actually held successfully. And the police was protecting LGBT activists. And the same year, the same police officers came to the community center. They came with guns, and there was I don't know, just some small event. And they took all the belongings of people who came to this event, and they pushed all the people who came to the wall, and they were interrogating them. And it happened the same year in the same city. So, you know, it's absolutely unpredictable, and probably the authorities, they want it to be unpredictable because it makes people afraid. Of course, the people who came to this event where police officers burst in, probably many of them will not come again. Because openness, it's not something that is very popular in Russia among LGBT community, because people are afraid. In such big cities as St. Petersburg or Moscow, you can be open. And it can be quite okay. I mean, I am publicly open and I am fine, but it's absolutely different in smaller cities, where the level of aggression and intolerance and violence is much more higher.
I'd like to ask you also, how do you see are Russians more homophobic than Swedes? What do you think? And I mean, how much is this something relating to the authorities, and how much is sort of has a ground in attitudes in people?
Well, I would say it's interconnected because, I mean, there are very conservative beliefs and prejudices in the general publics, which are now kind of heated up and supported by the message sent from the authorities and from the mainstream media. It's quite emblematic that every time any media publishes any piece of news or any material where LGBTI issues are mentioned, you will get hundreds of homophobic, very radical comments of the readers on social networks or on the web page of the media. So actually, those people who are openly homophobic are quite outspoken and quite eager and willing to express their views in public. So there is no taboo, nothing prevents them from expressing those very violent homophobic views at the moment. So I think this is the main difference between kind of the climate, the atmosphere in the society in Russia and in countries like Sweden, because maybe the percentage of people who are more or less homophobic is not so radically different, but the way people express themselves is different. So in countries like Russia, it is more or less now officially allowed to express your homophobic views, and nobody would be responsible for that. And this results in this hate being visible and very much influencing the real situation.
Yeah, actually I call what's going on in Russia right now state-sponsored homophobia, because the majority of Russian populations are getting information exclusively from TV. Like 80% are getting information only from TV, and we don't have access to TV. And on TV we are called like all the awful words you just can imagine. So I believe that this is the direct responsibility of the state, and I don't think that Russian people have something really homophobic in nature. And I truly believe that if we would have access to television, we would change the situation in a year.
Thank you, Svetlana. I gave you the chance to say your ending words 10 minutes ago, but Konstantin, maybe you also have something to say about what we can do from here, from Sweden, to support LGBTI groups, the community, and yeah, this.
Well, there is a permanent need for international support for LGBTI movement and in general the human rights movement in Russia. And this can take different forms, including raising funds for the support of those groups that work for the protection of those rights in Russia and in other countries where they are mostly endanger those rights. Because, well, sometimes it happens that the international attention is drawn to what is happening, which was the case when there were the Olympic Games in Sochi in 2014. And then there was a big international mobilization. Also, a lot of funds were raised, and this helped to support LGBTI groups in Russia for several years. But now this attention has faded. So we think that it should be there on a permanent basis, and it should not be dependent on this kind of occasions.
And there our time ran out. So a big hand and a big thanks to Konstantin Baranov, Svetlana Zacharova, and good luck with your work in Russia.